What if Judas never betrayed Jesus? Not a different symbol, not a different story with a cleaner villain, but a different weight at the center of everything. Because the betrayal wasn't only a plot device that moved the night forward, it was a mirror. It was a warning that the danger to faith doesn't always come from outside the circle. Sometimes it grows inside it. And if that one moment never happened, if that kiss in the garden never took place, then the question is not simply, would the cross still happen? The deeper question is, what would the story reveal instead? And what would we lose, spiritually, if we removed the most uncomfortable lesson? Before we imagine the what if, we need to honor the canon. We need to remember what the scriptures actually say happened and why it mattered. In the canonical story, Judas Iscariot is one of the 12, close enough to hear every teaching, close enough to see the mercy up close enough to share the bread. And yet, he chooses to hand Jesus over. At the Last Supper, Jesus says that one of them will betray him, and Judas leaves into the night. Later, in Gethsemane, Judas leads the arresting party to Jesus and identifies him with a kiss. Jesus is seized, the disciples scatter, the trials follow, and the path moves toward the cross. But canonically, Judas is more than a historical detail. His betrayal becomes a spiritual warning written into the story itself. Proximity is not the same as surrender. A person can walk near the light and still choose darkness, and that uncomfortable truth humbles the church in every generation, reminding us to watch, to pray, and to ask God to guard the heart from the quiet drift that comes before a fall. Now, we change one thing. What if Judas never betrayed Jesus? Not that temptation vanished from the world, not that evil took a vacation, just this: Judas reaches the edge of the act and stops. He doesn't go to the priests, or he goes but his courage collapses, or he goes to lead them and turns back. He doesn't guide the soldiers to the garden. He doesn't mark Jesus with a kiss. That night, the arrest doesn't happen the way Scripture records, and immediately we feel the tension. Because without betrayal, there is delay. Without betrayal, the story doesn't end. It stretches. And when a story stretches, it reveals different parts of the human heart. That night, Jesus still prays in Gethsemane. The burden is still there. The sorrow still presses down. He still speaks of the cup. He still wrestles in prayer. The disciples still struggle to stay awake. The spiritual weight of the moment does not disappear, because the cross is not merely a political outcome. It is a spiritual horizon. But the footsteps don't arrive. No torches, no armed crowd, no sudden chaos. The garden stays quiet, and quiet can be terrifying in a different way, because now the disciples are not forced into a crisis. They are left to wait, and waiting is its own test. Waiting reveals whether your faith depends on drama or on devotion. Waiting is where fear grows slowly. It's where the mind imagines every possible ending. Jesus rises from prayer, and the night passes. They leave the garden. They return to the city. And now, the question becomes unavoidable. If the authorities wanted Jesus gone last night, they will want him gone today. The net has not been removed. It has only been tightened. Spiritually, that night becomes a warning in another direction. In the canon, betrayal teaches us that danger can come from within. In this alternate path, the night teaches another lesson. Even when the threat is outside, fear inside can still scatter us. Even when no one shows up with chains, we can still live like we are already captured. In the first 6 months after that night, the story doesn't become safer. It becomes tenser, slower, and more spiritually revealing. Without Judas to hand Jesus over in secret, the authorities lose their cleanest path. They can't rely on a quiet arrest away from the crowds, so they begin to tighten pressure in other ways. Watching movements, stirring suspicion, attempting to isolate Jesus from the people, and quietly probing the disciples for cracks. And that shift matters, because spiritual opposition often works like this. If it can't destroy the shepherd in one strike, it tries to scatter the flock over time through fear, confusion, and fatigue. For the disciples, the danger is no longer a sudden shock in the garden. It becomes a constant weight. Every day feels borrowed. Every gathering carries risk. And prolonged pressure tests the soul differently than a single dramatic crisis. Some people don't fall in one moment. They erode. They retreat inch by inch, not because they hate Christ, but because they grow tired of being afraid. In these months, the temptation is not only don't betray, but don't drift. Don't let vigilance fade into spiritual sleep. And Judas, still present in this alternate path, becomes the most unsettling question of all. If he did not betray Jesus, what stopped him? Was it fear, remorse, love awakening at the edge, or the mercy of God intercepting him before the act became history? Whatever the reason, the battle doesn't disappear. It turns inward. Because resisting a sin once is not the same as being healed from the desire that led there. In these months, Judas either moves toward confession and light, or he carries an almost in silence, an unspoken near collapse that can harden the heart just as surely as the act itself. And as the months pass, two plausible paths begin to form, like two shadows cast by the same turning point. In one path, the leaders eventually find another opening, another informant, another moment, and Jesus is arrested later under different circumstances. The cross still approaches, but the community arrives there shaped less by betrayal and more by sustained pressure, and sustained pressure carries a quiet danger. Watch and pray. Don't let vigilance fade into spiritual sleep. In the other path, the arrest is delayed even longer, and the movement grows wider in the public eye. But wider crowds mean sharper expectations, and the wrong kind of expectation can turn holy longing into political fire, because hope in the wrong hands can look like revolt. Either way, the first 6 months become a season of refining. The threat is stretched across time, and faith is proved not in one dramatic night, but in daily devotion. A year after that night that never happened, the most significant change is not political. It is symbolic and spiritual, because the church is shaped by the warnings it carries. In the canonical story, Judas becomes a name that means something. His betrayal becomes a living caution. Beware of loving money more than Christ. Beware of an unguarded heart. Beware of secret sin that grows in the dark. Let anyone who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. But in this alternate timeline, that caution sounds different. Without Judas's betrayal, the community's warning shifts, less about the traitor within, more about the pressure without, less about sudden collapse, more about endurance. And endurance is holy, but it can hide a danger too. A people can learn to suffer boldly in public while growing careless in private, forgetting that the heart must be kept with all diligence. Now move forward a generation. This is where alternate history becomes spiritual reflection, because the church is shaped by the stories it tells itself. In the canon, the story includes the uncomfortable truth that one of the 12 fell. That truth keeps the church humble. It warns leaders that titles do not equal holiness. It warns communities that proximity does not equal surrender. But in this alternate reality, that story is missing. The church's origin story becomes cleaner. And a cleaner origin can create a dangerous illusion, the illusion that we are the faithful ones and they are the enemies. It can make believers forget that the battlefield is not only outside the walls, it is inside. Without Judas, the church still faces persecution. It still faces false teaching. It still faces suffering, but it may face them with less internal self-awareness. And spiritual self-awareness is one of the greatest protections God gives His people. So what changes in the biblical history, in the spiritual atmosphere of the story? Perhaps the early church becomes braver in public confession, yet slower to confront private compromise. Leaders may grow more confident but less watchful, and the community learns endurance while neglecting the quieter work of guarding the heart. And if the arrest and crucifixion still come, whether sooner or later, the meaning of the cross is not erased, but the lesson around it shifts. Less about betrayal in a moment, more about delay over time. Less about a kiss that breaks, more about pressure that wears. And here is the sobering truth. Delay can be merciful, but it can also deceive. When judgment doesn't come quickly, we begin to feel safe. Yet Scripture warns that the heart can harden quietly, almost unnoticed. So would a world without Judas's betrayal be a better world? Not automatically. Removing one act of darkness doesn't remove darkness. It changes where it shows itself and which warnings become loud or silent. In the canonical story, Judas is an uncomfortable mirror. Proximity is not surrender, and a heart can stand near the light and still choose the dark. That truth is not given to breed paranoia, but humility, to make every disciple pray, "Lord, search me, keep me," and to remember that falls often begin in secret. In this alternate story, the church might face persecution with courage, yet lose a sharp warning about the danger within. It may learn endurance under pressure, but grow less alert to slow compromise, to comfort, to applause, to spiritual drowsiness. And that is why the old words still matter: watch and pray. And perhaps the deepest point is this: the gospel does not only redeem the betrayed, it exposes the betrayer in all of us, the parts that bargain, conceal, and drift. Grace is not only what restores after collapse, it is also what interrupts the fall before it becomes history. So let me ask you a final question. If Judas never betrayed Jesus, what would the church remember differently? Would it become stronger or simply shaped by different scars? And what turning point should we examine next? Write your next turning point in the comments. And if you're here for Scripture treated with weight, canon first, consequences second, then subscribe. Because sometimes the most important question isn't what would change in the world, it's what would change in the heart.